Well, hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the first step in the two steps of the essay engineering method. The first step is about meaning reconstruction. We've talked a little bit before about that, but I'm going to go through it in some more detail, talking about specific tools that we can use and how we can actually arrive at the end result. Now, when we talk about meaning reconstruction, I want to make it clear that what that means is we're reconstructing the textual points. By textual points, what that means is that we think of the text as asserting points or propositions, and the job of the reader is to reconstruct those. These are texts, these are points or propositions which the author has made, and the reader has to be able to reconstruct them. And by reconstruct them, I mean something very specific. That means you have to be able to say in your own words what the text means. That means it has to be a paraphrase. That means the meaning has to be an independent reconstruction. It does not count if you're simply repeating the text and the exact words from the text. That's not a meaning reconstruction, that's quoting from the text. And it's dangerous. It's helpful. Many times you do need to quote from the text, but we want to always make sure we can paraphrase and say in our own words what that text means. So the primary skill that we're working with when we engage in this reconstruction is what I call converting this textual linguistic meaning into a direct meaning of a reality. Now, this is a little bit of a complicated concept because you have to think about, on the one hand, the linguistic sense of meaning, and on the other hand, the reality sense of a meaning. Because when we read a sentence, the sentence has all these little linguistic bits, all these little linguistic parts. It has words which have different meanings. It has verbs, it has nouns, and they all work together. And all these linguistic parts work together to create a linguistic meaning. But there's something magical that happens, and what that is it's what I call the magic of creating a reality meaning. The idea that you no longer see just the language and what that means, but you actually see and feel some kind of a reality. Now this is most apparent to readers when you're trying to read something and you're stuck. I think when readers are stuck on something, that means they can't see the reality meaning. They're stuck with the linguistic meaning, and they can't even make full sense of the linguistic meaning. But when that happens, I think readers become aware of the fact that what they want to be doing is creating this magical leap beyond the linguistic, a leap from the linguistic to reconstituting a kind of lived reality. And the tricky thing here, the thing we have to remember, is that the way that we make that leap, the way that we create the magic of this reconstituted reality, is through paying attention to every single linguistic detail. It's only once we've mastered the meaning of the words, that is the diction, and the way the words combine in a sentence to create meaning, that is the syntax. Only when we understand everything about the language can we understand this reconstituted reality and make that leap beyond the linguistic. Otherwise, the reader who hasn't figured out how to create this magic and how to make that leap, the reader is stuck being puzzled with the linguistic parts. So one tool I'd like to give you, one tool I'd like my students to use, is the idea of a linguistic puzzle or a language puzzle. What that means is you have to see every single sentence, and of course the entire paragraph, as a language puzzle, meaning something you have to make sense of. Obviously, anytime we look at language as a reader, as a student, it's puzzling, it's confusing. We can't immediately make sense of it. A lot of times readers want to jump ahead. That's not the good thing to do. You don't want to rush ahead. You want to go slowly and make sure you understand 100% of the sentence. So as you're working through this puzzle, there are two parts. You have to understand the individual meaning of each individual word. Secondly, you have to understand the synthesis of the sentence as a whole, how all of these little parts work together to create an entire linguistic meaning. And as you synthesize that meaning, that allows you to create the magic, that allows you to make this leap from language, from the linguistic detail, to the reality, to the reconstituted lived experience. So that's the first tool that I'd like people to use. Another general tool that's very important anytime we're talking about essay engineering or meaning reconstruction or meaning patterns is what I call heuristic improvement. Heuristic simply means in action, or a process which is repeated over and over again. What heuristic means and what the heuristic improvement means is that we have to repeat over and over again this tool of the language puzzle. That means is when you work on a sentence or paragraph, you have to continually repeat the process of puzzling it out. And not just on one day, but over multiple days. So let's say on Monday you start on a reading assignment. Well, you want to work on the language puzzle of a chapter probably 2 or 3 times, meaning each sentence you go through 2 or 3 times, and maybe you go through the entire chapter twice as well. But what heuristic improvement means also is that maybe on Tuesday you go back to that same chapter and work on it again. This is important because, as I said, that leap to constituting reality, to reconstituting reality, it's only possible if you grasp 100% of the language details, of the linguistic details of the sentence. To grasp 100% of the linguistic details, we have to engage in this heuristic improvement. This heuristic improvement is a tool in both meaning reconstitution now in step 1, and also in meaning patterns in step 2. But in both parts, what this allows us to do is it allows us to engage in a self-critique and a self-revision. This is crucial to getting better at anything. Athletes do this, professionals of all kinds do this. You must constantly re-examine what you've done, go back to the same sentence, the same chapter, to improve. Another word related to heuristic is the word iterative. Iterative means to repeat, to do something again and again. So we can use the phrase, it's an iterative self-critique and an iterative self-revision that we use. This is important because only through iteration, only through self-critique and self-revision can we arrive at the correct understanding. Until you've engaged in this repetition, the understanding of the linguistic details will only be at 50% or maybe 60, 70%. But if you're at 60 or 70%, you're not understanding what's happening, and you're not able to make that leap to reconstituting reality. And that is crucial. All right, let me see if there are any other tools that I want to talk about today. We have the language puzzle. Another thing I'd like to talk about is evidence-based proposition. This is the idea that when we are making any proposition or assertion, whether in part one of the meaning reconstruction, which results in a synopsis, or whether in part 2 of meaning patterns, where we use proposition chains and construct paragraphs. In both parts 1 and 2, we must always use evidence-based proposition. What I mean by that is that your interpretation must be based on evidence from the text. One should never make a claim or an assertion about what a story means, or what's happening in a story, or what a passage means, without having very specific evidence, an exact clause or sentence which provides support for that proposition. So your evidence-based proposition will have 3 parts. Before you assert what the meaning of a sentence is, you have to make sure that you have textual evidence, and this textual evidence requires an understanding of the language detail. And you must have a rationale. You have to work out your explanation for what this textual evidence means. And the conclusion, finally, the third part, is the evidence-based proposition. So again, to recapitulate, to repeat, we have three parts. We have the first, the evidence that you identify. Second, the rationale or the explanation of how you're making sense of this evidence. Finally, the interpretation or the resulting proposition. So it goes evidence, rationale, interpretation. And this means that your proposition or interpretation always has a sound grounding, a solid foundation in what the text actually says. This is crucial because only thus can our propositions be accurate. If we're not basing our assertions and our claims on evidence, then they're inaccurate. Only through basing our propositions on evidence can we think with precision. All right, that's a second tool that you can use, and we've also talked about accuracy and precision, which is always very important. We talked about language puzzles. I think that might be enough for today's video. Let me have one quick look. We also talked about heuristic improvement and iterative self-critique and self-revision. And we talked mainly about what it is we engage in when we're reconstructing the textual points in part one. We talked about the textual linguistic details and how we have to convert this. We have to make the magic leap to the reconstituted lived reality. One other thing I'd like to say is that when we're reconstituting this this reality, this lived experience, there are a couple other things we have to do. The first is that we have to convert the indirect meaning of the text into direct meaning. So very often in the text, there will be a lot of meaning which is not directly stated. It's only implicit or tacit. Thus, when we're reconstructing the meaning, when we're reconstituting the reality from the text, we have to make sure all meaning is stated directly. And we have to, again, similar to evidence-based propositions, the direct meaning that we state must be grounded in the indirect meaning of the text. That's one point I'd like to make. The second point I'd like to make is the primary result of step one. So as we said, the primary skill of step one is this reconstruction of meaning based on the 100% complete grasp of all linguistic details of every sentence. That's the primary skill of step one. And the result, the primary result of step one, and the concrete result of meaning reconstruction is that we have a synopsis of the text which contains the interior and theoretical meaning types. It's primarily a list. It's a list which runs parallel to and really traces the plot of the story and the sequence of events in the plot. However, the exterior meaning is not central to the synopsis. What's central is the interior and theoretical meaning. So in a certain sense, it does trace the sequence of the story, but the central meaning that we're drawing out is the interior and theoretical, which is of course not the exterior. The one other point to make, and this will be discussed later in another video, but we also have to become aware of what are the major passages and what are the minor passages. We have to be able to distinguish when something important is happening. This is very difficult to explain except by example, except by seeing where there are important key words and working through passages and seeing, based on an example, when we go through, say, one chapter of Wind in the Willows, which passages do we pull out as important? And when you've worked through that, then you'll be able to do that. But it's important to be aware that that's another tool you have to use. You have to be aware of which passages are major and which are minor. Major passages are ones which contain important points. The minor passages are ones which typically in your synopsis you might not even refer to, or if you do mention them in your synopsis, it will be very, very brief. So that is a synopsis again in this video, in this lesson today of step 1 of the essay engineering method. The second step is meaning reconstruction, where we talk about transforming this textual reality into what I call a humanistic concept. And the humanistic concept is at the core of how I redefine essay writing. So thank you for watching the video today. I hope you found it helpful, and stay tuned for more videos. Thanks.